The shuttle docked with a low hum that shook the floor beneath Danny Cole's boots. He grabbed his single bag, slung it over his shoulder, and stepped through the airlock into the wide, curving corridor of Thesara 9. The orbital station was enormous. Its main ring stretched out in both directions like a road that bent upward and never ended. Lights embedded in the ceiling shifted colors as students from dozens of species walked past him, some on 2 legs, some on 4, and a few that floated without legs at all. Danny was 22 years old, born and raised in a small town in Montana where the winters were long and the nearest neighbor lived 3 miles down a dirt road. He had brown hair cut short, a square jaw, and the kind of calm, steady eyes that came from growing up around animals that could kill you if you were not paying attention. He was one of only 3 humans ever admitted to the Galactic Union Academy's xenobiology program. And from the moment he stepped onto the station, every alien in the corridor gave him space. Not because they knew who he was, because something about the way he moved made them step aside without thinking about it. He found his assigned housing block on the 2nd level of the academic ring. The room was small but clean, with a sleeping platform, a desk, and a window that looked out into the black of space. He set his bag down, looked out at the stars for a moment, and then went to find the cafeteria. He was hungry, and Danny Cole was the kind of person who solved problems in order of importance. The cafeteria was a massive open hall with hundreds of tables arranged in clusters. Food stations lined the walls, each one designed for a different species and a different biology. Danny found the one labeled for carbon-based omnivores, grabbed a tray, and loaded it with something that looked close enough to a sandwich. Now, he added hot sauce from a small bottle he had packed in his bag, because Danny brought hot sauce everywhere, and then looked for a place to sit. Most of the tables were already claimed by groups of students who had arrived earlier in the week. Danny spotted a table near the back with only one occupant. The figure sitting there was lean and covered in short, dark fur. He had pointed ears, sharp yellow eyes, and a stillness about him that reminded Danny of the mountain lions back home. The kind of stillness that meant the creature was always watching, always ready. Danny walked over and set his tray down across from the stranger. "Mind if I sit here?" The alien looked up at him. His pupils narrowed to thin slits. He said nothing for a long moment, and then spoke in a low, smooth voice that the translator implant in Danny's ear converted to English. "You are the human." "Danny," he said, and stuck out his hand. The alien stared at the hand. Among his people, grabbing another's limb was either a challenge or a restraint, and the baring of teeth, which Danny was doing right now in what humans called a smile, was a threat display. But the human did not smell like aggression. He smelled like confidence and hot sauce. "Torvan," the alien said. He did not take the hand. Danny shrugged and sat down. "Nice to meet you, Torvan. What species are you, if you don't mind me asking?" "Keshari." Danny nodded as if that meant something to him. It did not. But he figured he would learn. He bit into his sandwich and chewed with obvious satisfaction. Torvan watched him eat. The Keshari had a plate of raw meat in front of him that he had not touched since Danny sat down. He was used to eating alone. Other students avoided him. The Keshari were a predator species, one of the few admitted to the academy, and most of the student body was made up of species that had evolved to run from things like Torvan. But this human had walked right up and sat down like it was nothing. Over the next few days, Danny met the rest of his assigned peer group. Rillick was a Velocity, thin, fragile-looking, with 4 arms, translucent blue skin, and enormous dark eyes that always seemed to be on the edge of panic. He flinched at loud noises, spoke in a rapid and nervous voice, and had a habit of wringing all 4 of his hands together when he was stressed, which was most of the time. He had been assigned as Danny's lab partner, and on the first day of class he sat as far from Danny as the shared desk allowed. Pex was a Gron, a species that looked like a walking boulder. He was short and wide and covered in thick, stone-like plates of natural armor. He moved slowly, spoke slowly, and thought carefully before every sentence. Danny liked him immediately. Pex reminded him of the old ranchers back home who never said a word more than they needed to. Mila was a Silith, but tall and graceful with a crest of bright feathers that rose from the top of her head and ran down the back of her neck. She was sharp, proud, and made it clear from the first moment that she considered most other species beneath her. She looked at Danny the way someone might look at a stray dog that had wandered into a fancy restaurant. Curious, but not impressed. The 5 of them were assigned to the same lecture group, the same lab sessions, and the same study block. And they would spend the entire semester together, learning, working, and, if the academy had its way, growing to understand species that their deepest instincts told them to fear or avoid. On the first morning of formal classes, the entire incoming class gathered in a lecture hall that curved like the inside of a shell. At the front, floating 3 feet above the podium, was Professor Galeth. The Myresi was ancient, and tipped with a tiny bioluminescent node that pulsed as it spoke. "Welcome," Galeth said, and its voice filled the room without any visible effort. "You have come here from worlds that shaped you in ways you do not yet understand. Some of you evolved to hunt. Some of you evolved to hide. Some of you evolved on worlds so gentle that the greatest danger you ever faced was a strong wind. And some of you evolved on worlds that tried to kill you every single day of your lives." The tendrils gestured, almost casually, toward 2 students in the crowd. Torvon and Danny. The students around them shifted in their seats. Most of them looked at Torvon. The Keshari was a known quantity. A predator, dangerous, but understood. Predators existed on most worlds. I was sitting comfortably in his seat with his legs stretched out in front of him and his hands folded behind his head, completely relaxed, as if he were sitting on a porch back home watching the sun go down. And something about that ease, that total absence of fear in a room full of aliens, that was more unsettling than any set of claws could ever be. Danny caught Rillick staring at him and gave the Velocity a friendly nod. Rillick quickly looked away, his 4 hands twisting together in his lap. The semester had begun, and no one in that room, not even Danny himself, knew just how much it was going to change all of them. 3 weeks into the semester, Danny Cole had settled into a routine that the rest of the student body found both fascinating and deeply disturbing. Every morning, he woke before the station's artificial sunrise and went to the low-gravity gymnasium on the lower deck. The gym was designed to simulate a range of gravitational conditions so that students from different worlds could exercise in comfort. Most students trained at standard galactic gravity, which was roughly 60% of Earth's pull. Danny set his section of the gym to 3 times standard gravity and worked out for an hour. These students who passed the observation windows on their way to breakfast would stop and watch. Danny did pull-ups, 1 arm at a time, with a weight strapped to his waist. He ran sprints that left scorch-like marks on the grip surface of the floor. He hit a heavy bag, with combinations so fast and so hard that a Grand Engineering student quietly calculated the force of each strike and then walked away without finishing breakfast. Nobody said anything to Danny about it. He was friendly, approachable, and always willing to help with homework or share his lunch. But the watching continued, and so did the whispers. Rillick was the first to dig deeper. As Danny's lab partner, the Velocity spent more time around the human than anyone else, and the closeness made him nervous enough to do research. One evening, alone in his quarters, he accessed the galactic database and searched for Earth. What he found made his blood run cold. Earth was classified as a Category 12 Deathworld, which was nearly the highest rating on the scale. The planet's gravity was punishing. Its atmosphere was a volatile mix of oxygen and nitrogen that could feed fires hot enough to melt metal. The weather systems included rotating columns of wind that could flatten cities, waves of water tall enough to swallow ships, and electrical storms that struck the ground with enough energy to stop a heart. The oceans, which covered 70% of the surface, were filled with creatures that ranged from merely dangerous to absolutely nightmarish. Animals with enough venom to kill a Gron in seconds, predators with rows of replaceable teeth, and organisms so deep in the ocean that they lived in total darkness and pressure that would crush a shuttle hull. And then there were the humans. Rillick read about persistence hunting, and he had to read the entry 3 times because he was sure the translator was making a mistake. It was not. Humans, off the entry explained, were not the fastest or the strongest predators on their world. They were not the most venomous or the most armored. What they were was relentless. Early humans hunted by chasing their prey at a moderate pace for hours, sometimes across entire days, until the animal they were chasing simply collapsed from exhaustion. The human would then walk up to it and finish it. No ambush, no speed, just the slow, patient, the unstoppable knowledge that the human would still be coming long after everything else had given up. Rillick closed the database and sat in silence for a very long time. The next day, he pulled Mila and Pex into an empty study room and shared what he had found. He spoke quickly, his 4 hands moving in frantic gestures as he described Earth's oceans, its predators, its weather, and its dominant species. Mila leaned back in her chair and flicked her feathered crest in a gesture of dismissal. Every species exaggerates its homeworld. It is a point of pride. This is not exaggeration, Rillick said. This is from the Galactic Survey Corps. These are verified reports. Mila, humans domesticated wolves. Do you understand what that means? Wolves are pack-hunting apex predators on Earth, and humans turned them into companions. They sleep in human homes. Human children play with them. Pex, who had been listening quietly with his thick arms folded across his armored chest, it made a low, rumbling sound. What else do they domesticate? Rillick pulled up more records. Cattle, horses, birds of prey. They even keep small predators called cats in their homes for comfort. And they consume ethanol. The Galactic Medical Database lists it as a Class 2 toxin. For recreation. They drink it at social events. For fun. Mila's crest was no longer dismissive. It had flattened against her skull, which among the Silith was a sign of genuine unease. He is more dangerous than the Kashari, Rillick said, and his voice was barely a whisper. Torvain is an ambush predator, fast, strong, lethal, but he tires. He strikes and it is over. Danny is something else. Danny does not stop. His species does not stop. That is how they conquered their world. The 3 of them sat in silence after that, each processing the information in their own way. Meanwhile, Danny had no idea any of this was happening. He spent his evenings studying in the cafeteria, sitting across from Torvan, the 2 of them sharing a comfortable silence that neither felt the need to fill. Danny ate foods that made the air around him smell like chemical fire. Torvan ate raw meat with his bare claws. Neither of them commented on the other's choices. It was, in its own way, the most natural friendship in the academy. Torvan was not afraid of Danny, but he was curious. The Kashari had grown up among hunters, and his people valued silence, patience, and the ability to read another predator's intent from the smallest shift in posture or scent. And what Torvan read in Danny was something he had never encountered before. The human was not performing dominance. He was not puffing himself up or baring his teeth to intimidate. He was simply existing in a state of total readiness that he did not even seem to be aware of. It was like watching a coiled spring that had been coiled for so long it had forgotten it was under tension. Then the safety drill happened. It was supposed to be routine. A simulated depressurization alarm, the kind the academy ran once a month to make sure students knew where the emergency shelters were. The alarm sounded, a sharp, pulsing tone that echoed through every corridor, and students began moving toward the marked exits. But the alarm was louder than usual. Someone in maintenance had set it to the wrong level, and the sound hit a frequency that triggered a deep biological response in every prey species student on the station. Rillick froze. His entire body locked up, every muscle rigid, his enormous dark eyes wide and unseeing. It was a Velocity fear response, hardwired into his nervous system across millions of years of evolution. When something terrifying happened, a Velocity did not run. A Velocity became perfectly still and hoped the predator would not notice. Danny saw it happen from 10 feet away. He did not hesitate. He did not ask questions. He closed the distance in 2 strides, bent down, and scooped Rillick off the ground with one arm. He threw the Velocity over his shoulder like a sack of grain and started running. He ran through the corridor at a full sprint, weaving between students, ducking under a low-hanging support beam, and sliding around a corner with a hand on the wall for balance. He reached the emergency shelter in 43 seconds. The next closest student arrived almost a full minute later. Danny set Rillick down gently on a bench, checked his eyes, and said, "You're okay, buddy. Just breathe." Rillick blinked. His body slowly unlocked, one limb at a time. He looked up at Danny and saw that the human was barely breathing hard. When the drill ended and the class reassembled in the main hall, no one spoke. Danny stood among them with his hands in his pockets, looking like nothing had happened. But every student in that hall had seen the biosensor readings on their wrist units during the drill. They had seen their own heart rate spike to dangerous levels. And they had seen Danny's heart rate drop, not rise, drop. The moment the danger started, the human's body had become calmer, slower, more controlled. As if some ancient part of his brain had recognized the emergency and responded not with panic, but with focus. As if his entire species had been built for exactly this kind of moment. Every student in the room was looking at him now, not at Torvan, not at any of the predator species, at the human from Earth who had just carried a frozen alien to safety faster than anyone else could run unburdened. And who was now standing there with his hands in his pockets as if he had done nothing more remarkable than hold open a door. Torvan stood at the back of the room and watched Danny with his sharp yellow eyes. The Keshari was not afraid. He had never been afraid of anything in his life. But for the first time, standing in that room, looking at the calm human with the slowing heart, Torvan felt something he had no word for in his own language. It was not fear. It was recognition. And the Vraxian arrived on a Tuesday. His name was Sur, and he came aboard Thesara 9 with the confidence of a creature that had never once in its life been told no. He stood nearly 8 feet tall. His body was covered in dark green scales that overlapped like plates of natural armor. His tail was thick and muscular, ending in a ridged club of bone. It vibrated under his weight. The Vraxians vibrated under his weight. The Vraxians were a predator species from a high-gravity world, and unlike the Keshari, who had built a culture around discipline and the honor of the hunt, the Vraxians had built their civilization around dominance. Strength was law, fear was currency, and Sur spent money the moment he arrived. On his first day, he walked into the cafeteria during the midday meal and stood in the center of the room. He did not say a word. He simply looked around, slowly, letting every student see his full size, his claws, his teeth. Then he walked to a table where 3 Velocity students were eating, placed both hands flat on the surface, and leaned down until his face was inches from theirs. The Velocity scrambled away so fast that one of them fell off the bench. Sur sat down in their place and began eating their food. And no one said anything. Over the next several days, Sur established his territory. He claimed a bench in the common area. He growled at anyone who walked too close in the corridors. He stood in doorways and forced smaller students to squeeze past him, brushing against his scales which left small cuts on unarmored skin. He was never quite violent enough to trigger an official disciplinary response, but the message was clear. This was his space now, and everyone else was living in it at his pleasure. Complaints were filed. The administration acknowledged them and promised to address the situation, but the Vraxians were politically powerful in the Galactic Union, and Sewer's family had connections. Nothing happened. Danny watched all of it. He sat in the cafeteria and ate his meals. He attended his classes and completed his assignments. He said nothing about Sewer to anyone. But Torvon noticed the change. The Kashari had spent enough time around Danny to read him the way he read the wind on a hunt, and something had shifted. Danny was still calm, still friendly, still quick with a joke or a kind word. But underneath all of that, something had gone quiet in the human. A deeper kind of quiet. The kind that came before a storm. Danny had stopped smiling. Torvon had seen this behavior in the great hunters of his home world, the ancient predators that lived in the deep forests of Kesher. And then, when the moment came, they moved still. They watched. And then, when the moment came, they moved with a violence so sudden and so total that it was over before the threat even understood what had happened. Danny was watching Sewer, and he was very, very still. The breaking point came during a field lab on the surface of a barren moon called Verath 4. The class had been transported down to study extremophile organisms that lived in the volcanic vents near the moon's equator. The air was thin, the ground was hot, and the landscape was a maze of black rock formations and steaming fissures. The students worked in small groups, collecting samples and recording data. Danny's group was spread out across a wide area, each member focused on their assigned task. And Rillick had wandered behind a tall rock formation to collect a lichen sample when Sewer followed him. Danny did not see it happen. Mila did. She was standing on a ridge 50 meters away when she saw the Vraxian's massive shape disappear behind the same rocks that Rillick had entered. She called Danny's name and pointed. Danny set down his sample kit. He did not run. He walked. Behind the rocks, Sewer had cornered Rillick against the stone wall. The Velocity was pressed flat against the surface. All four arms pulled tight against his body, his enormous eyes locked on the Vraxian's face. Sewer was leaning over him, one clawed hand pressed against the rock beside Rillick's head, his tail sweeping the ground behind him in slow, heavy arcs. He was speaking in a low growl that the translator rendered as a series of insults. The Velocity was weak, pathetic, a waste of resources, the kind of creature that existed only because the galaxy had gone soft. Rillick could not move. Then his body had locked again, the same freeze response that had taken him during the safety drill. But this time, there was no alarm to blame. This time there was just a predator standing over him, and every cell in Rillick's body was screaming that he was about to die. Then Danny stepped around the rock face. He did not announce himself. He did not shout. He simply walked into the space between Sewer and Rillick and stopped. He stood with his feet apart, his shoulders level, and his arms loose at his sides. He looked up at the Vraxian and said nothing. Sewer straightened to his full height. He was a foot taller than Danny and outweighed him by at least 100 pounds. His lips pulled back, exposing the full length of his serrated teeth. A deep growl rolled out of his chest, a threat display that was hardwired to trigger terror in every prey species in the galaxy. Danny did not move. Every student in the field group had a biosensor unit strapped to their wrist that tracked heart rate, respiration, and stress hormones. The readings were shared across the group for safety purposes. Every student could see every other student's numbers on their own display. Rillick's heart rate was at 190. Mila's was at 145. Peck's, standing 30 meters away and barely visible behind his armored shell, was at 120. Torvon, who had appeared silently on the ridge above, was at 95, low for a Keshari in a tense situation, because the Keshari were built to stay calm during a hunt. Danny's heart rate was 58. It was dropping. Sewer leaned down until his face was inches from Danny's. His breath was hot and smelled like copper. His claws extended from his fingers with a soft click. Every instinct in his body was telling him that this small, soft, clawless creature should be cowering, should be running, and should be doing anything other than standing perfectly still and looking him directly in the eyes with an expression that held absolutely nothing. No fear, no anger, no challenge. Just stillness. Danny spoke. His voice was low and even, and it carried clearly in the thin air. Where I come from, there is a word for someone who picks on people smaller than them, because they are afraid to face someone their own size. He paused. We call them cowards. Sewer's growl deepened. A Deathworld predator looks like when it a Deathworld predator looks like when it stops being friendly. And I promise you, Sewer, you do not want to see that. The silence lasted 10 seconds. It felt like 10 hours. Every student watching held their breath. Every biosensor on the field team was spiking except one. Danny's heart rate was now 52, and Sewer stared into the human's eyes. He searched for the bluff. He searched for the crack, the tremble, the micro-expression that would tell him this creature was pretending. He found nothing. He found a wall of calm so absolute that it felt like staring into deep water. You could not see the bottom, and you did not know what was down there, and every survival instinct you had was telling you not to find out. Sewer stepped back. He pulled his claws in. His tail went still. He turned and walked away without a word, his heavy footsteps fading into the distance between the black rock formations. Rillick slid down the wall and sat on the ground, breathing in sharp, shallow gasps. Danny crouched beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. You're all right, he said. He won't bother you again. That evening, back on the station, Torvald found Danny sitting alone on the observation deck. The human was leaning against the railing. I was looking out at the stars with the same expression he always wore. Quiet, thoughtful, steady. Torvald sat down beside him. They did not speak for a long time. Then Torvald said, I have hunted the great beasts of Keshar. I have faced creatures that could crush me with a single blow. I have never been afraid. Danny looked at him. Today, Torvald said slowly, I understood what fear feels like. Not because of the Vraxian. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because of you. When you stepped forward, I saw something in your eyes that every predator in the galaxy knows, but never expects to see aimed at them. Danny waited. The look, Torvald said, of something higher on the food chain. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he shrugged and said, I just don't like bullies. Torvald watched the human for a long time after that, and he thought about what it meant, that the most dangerous creature he had ever encountered described what it had done as simply not liking bullies. He thought about how humans said things like that. Small, humble, ordinary words to describe extraordinary acts, and he wondered if that was the most terrifying thing about them of all, not the strength, not the endurance, not the heartbeat that slowed when danger came closer, and the fact that they did not even realize how frightening they were. The survival training exercise was supposed to be simple. 48 hours on an uncolonized jungle world. Navigate from the drop point to the extraction zone using basic supplies and teamwork. Every student group would be monitored by a transport shuttle hovering in orbit, and emergency beacons were available if anything went wrong. It was a test of cooperation, not endurance. At least, that was the plan. So Danny's team was dropped into the jungle at dawn. The world was called Vareth 7, a dense, green planet with heavy air, thick canopy cover, and a sky so full of clouds that the sun was nothing more than a pale smear of light. The trees were enormous, trunks wider than shuttles, roots that rose out of the ground like walls, and leaves so broad that a single one could cover a Gron. The air smelled like wet soil and something sharp and sweet that Danny could not identify. The team stood at the edge of the clearing where the drop pod had landed. Rillick was already nervous, his 4 hands gripping his supply pack so tightly that his blue skin had gone pale. Pex stood motionless, his stone-like armor blending into the gray-brown landscape. Mila was scanning the tree line with sharp eyes, her feathered crest raised in alert. Torvon had his ears forward, nostrils flared, reading the wind. Danny took a slow breath and looked at the map on his wrist unit. The extraction point was 40 kilometers northeast, across a river, through a valley, and up a ridgeline. "All right," he said. "Let's move while we have light." The first 6 hours went well. Danny set a steady pace that even Pex could maintain, and the group moved through the forest in a loose formation with Torvon scouting ahead and Mila identifying plants that were safe to touch and ones that were not. They found a freshwater stream, refilled their containers, and made good progress toward the first waypoint. Then the sky lit up. A bright streak of orange fire cut across the clouds, followed by a sound like thunder that did not stop. The transport shuttle, the one that was supposed to be watching over all 12 student teams, was falling. Its engines were trailing black smoke and its hull was glowing red from atmospheric friction. It hit the jungle canopy 3 miles to the south with an impact that shook the ground beneath their feet and sent a column of fire and debris rising above the trees. The shock wave knocked Rillick off his feet. Mila grabbed a root to stay upright. Pex did not move because Pex did not move easily, but even he turned his massive head toward the crash site with something close to shock. Danny watched the smoke rise. Then he looked at his wrist unit. The communication signal was gone. The beacon link was gone. The map was still loaded in local memory, but without the shuttle, there was no one coming to check on them. No one to call for help. No one even knew where they were. "Okay," Danny said. His voice was calm, not forced calm, not pretending calm, just calm. "New plan." Rillick's breathing was fast and shallow. "We are alone. We are alone on an alien world with no communications and no rescue, and the shuttle is destroyed, and we are going to—" "Rillick!" Danny crouched down in front of the Velocity and put a hand on each of his upper shoulders. "Look at me. We are not going to die on this planet. I need you to take a breath and tell me what is in your supply pack." Something about the steadiness in Danny's voice cut through the panic. Rillick took a breath, then another. Then he opened his pack and started listing the contents with shaking hands. Danny stood and turned to the rest of the group. He told Pex to scan the area for high ground where they could set up a defensible camp. He told Mila to catalog every plant within 100 meters and mark anything toxic. He told Torvon to circle their position and look for animal trails, water sources, and any sign of large predators. Mila's crest was flat against her skull. "Why should we listen to you?" "You have never been to this world, none of us have." Danny met her eyes without hesitation. "My ancestors survived ice ages with nothing but animal skins and stone knives. They crossed oceans in wooden boats. They walked across deserts that would kill a Gron in a day. Getting dropped into a place that is trying to kill you and figuring out how to survive is not new for my species, Mila. It is what we do." Nobody argued. They made camp on a small rise beneath the roots of one of the giant trees. Danny built a shelter using broad leaves and flexible branches, creating a waterproof cover that kept the group dry when the rain started. And the rain on Vareth 7 was not gentle. It fell in sheets so heavy that visibility dropped to nothing, and it did not stop for hours. Danny sat under the shelter with the others and quietly sharpened a branch into a spear using a flat rock. Because Danny Cole was the kind of person who always wanted something sharp within reach when he was in unfamiliar territory. Night came fast. The clouds blocked every trace of starlight, and the jungle around them filled with sounds, clicks, hisses, low rumbling calls, and the occasional snap of a branch that was too heavy to have been broken by the wind. Torvain's ears rotated constantly, tracking the sounds. His night vision showed him shapes moving between the trees. Six-legged creatures, a low to the ground, with wide heads and reflective eyes. "Predators," Torvain said quietly. "A pack. 6, maybe 8. They are circling." Rillick pressed himself against the tree root. Pex retracted partially into his armor. Mila's feathers were so flat she looked like a different species. Danny stood up. He picked up his sharpened branch and walked to the edge of the firelight, a small chemical fire he had built using materials from the supply kits. He stood there at the border between the warm orange glow and the absolute darkness of the jungle, and he did not move. He stood there for the entire night, 12 hours. The darkness pressed in from every side, and the sounds of the pack circled and probed and tested. And Danny Cole stood at the edge of the light like a statue carved from stone. He held the spear loosely in one hand. He breathed slowly and steadily, his eyes never closed. The pack did not attack. They came close. Torvain could see them crouching in the undergrowth, heads low, eyes fixed on the figure standing in the light. But they did not charge. Something about the creature at the edge of the fire was wrong. It did not run. It did not freeze. It did not hide. It just stood there, watching them back, and every instinct in their predator brains told them the same thing that Sur's instincts had told him on the moon. This one is not prey. By morning, the pack was gone. Danny sat down by the fire and drank water. Torvain sat beside him. "How did you know they would not charge?" the Kashari asked. "I didn't," Danny said, "but I was ready if they did." On the second day, Danny led the group east through a swamp that stretched for miles. The mud was knee-deep in places and chest-deep in others. Rillick's thin legs could not handle the terrain, and halfway through the swamp, he collapsed. Danny pulled the Velocity onto his back and kept walking. He carried Rillick for 6 miles through sucking mud and stinking water without stopping, without complaining, and without slowing down. Peck sank into the mud 3 times. Each time, Danny and Torvain worked together to pull the heavy Gron free, bracing their feet against submerged roots and hauling with everything they had. Mila twisted her ankle on a hidden root and could not put weight on it. Danny knelt in the mud, fashioned a splint from vines and a straight branch, and wrapped it so precisely that the Academy medics who later examined it said it was perfect. On the 3rd day, they reached the ridgeline. Danny found wreckage from the crashed shuttle scattered across the slope and spent 2 hours pulling apart a damaged communication relay. He spliced wires, rerouted power from a backup cell, and built a signal booster from scrap metal and hope. When he activated it, the signal reached a passing Union patrol ship within minutes. By the time the rescue shuttle landed on the ridge, Danny had been awake for over 50 hours. He was covered in dried mud. His hands were cut from the wreckage. His clothes were torn and soaked with sweat. He had eaten nothing but 2 protein bars and whatever water he could find. He sat down on a flat rock, looked out at the jungle that had tried to kill them, and closed his eyes. He was asleep in 4 seconds. Torvain stood over him. When the rescue team tried to approach, the Kashari stepped between them and the sleeping human and bared his teeth, a gesture that, among the Kashari, was not a threat, but a sacred act. Mila asked him what he was doing. Torvain did not take his eyes off the approaching medics. "On my world, the greatest honor a hunter can give another is to guard them while they rest. It means you trust them with your life, and you believe they have earned their sleep." He looked down at Danny, who was snoring softly on the rock with mud in his hair and blood on his knuckles. "This human has earned 100 years of sleep." The medics waited. Torvain eventually stepped aside, and Danny Cole slept all the way back to Thesara 9, dreaming of mountains and open sky and the smell of pine trees in Montana. The week after the rescue was quiet. As the Academy suspended all field exercises while an investigation team picked through the wreckage of the transport shuttle and tried to figure out what had gone wrong. Students were given time to recover, and counselors from 6 different species were made available for anyone who needed to talk. Danny slept for 19 hours straight after they brought him back to the station. When he finally woke up, he showered, changed into clean clothes, then walked to the cafeteria as if nothing had happened. He loaded his tray, sat at his usual table across from Torvan, and poured hot sauce on something that the food station claimed was pasta. Torvan watched him eat with the quiet, unreadable expression that Danny had come to understand as the Kashari version of affection. "You look better," Torvan said. "I feel better," Danny said through a mouthful of food. "Had nothing like 19 hours of sleep and a hot shower." "You were unconscious for 19 hours, and the first thing you did was come here to eat." "A man has priorities." The cafeteria was more crowded than usual. Word of what had happened on Varath 7 had spread across the entire student body within hours of the rescue, and the story had grown with each retelling. By the time it reached the far side of the station, Danny had supposedly fought off a dozen predators with his bare hands. "I carried the entire team on his back and built a functioning spacecraft out of shuttle wreckage." The truth was impressive enough, but the galaxy has always preferred legends to facts. What was not exaggerated was the change in Sur. The Vraxian had been on a different team during the exercise. His group had stayed close to their drop point and been rescued within hours, long before the shuttle crash became a crisis. He had not been tested. He had not suffered. And now he walked the corridors of Thesara 9, knowing that every student on the station was comparing him to the human who had carried a Velocity through a swamp, stood guard against a predator pack for 12 hours, and stared down a Vraxian without his heart rate rising above 60. The first time Danny walked past Sur in the hallway after the rescue, every student nearby held their breath. Danny did not slow down. He did not speed up. He walked at his usual pace, his hands in his pockets, and his expression relaxed and open. Sur lowered his eyes. Among the Vraxians, lowering the eyes to another predator was the deepest acknowledgement of superiority that existed in their culture. It was not submission. It was recognition. It said, plainly and without shame, that the other was the greater threat, the higher predator, the one who would win if it ever came to a fight. Vraxians did not offer this gesture lightly. Many went their entire lives without giving it to anyone. Sur gave it to a human who was a foot shorter than him and weighed 100 pounds less, and he did it without being asked and without hesitation. Danny noticed. He gave Sur a small nod, not gloating, not triumphant, just a simple acknowledgement, and kept walking. And that, more than anything else, was what convinced the students who saw it that the stories about humans were true. A Vraxian had just declared him the apex predator in the room, and Danny Cole had responded as if someone had held a door open for him. Rillick, meanwhile, had changed in ways that surprised even himself. Before the semester, the idea of being assigned to a human lab partner had filled him with dread. After the safety drill, that dread had deepened into something close to terror. But after Varath 7, something had shifted inside the little Velocity that he could not explain. When the Academy offered to reassign him to a different partner for the remainder of the semester, Rillick refused. The administrator seemed confused. "You are aware," she said carefully, "that your current partner is classified as a Category 12 Deathworld Apex Predator?" Rillick's 4 hands were still for the first time anyone could remember. "Yes," he said. "That is why I feel safe." He paused and then continued. Not because Rillick had spent a long time thinking about this on the shuttle ride home while Danny slept beside him with mud still in his hair. "Humans are not like other predators," he said. "Other predators hunt the weak. Humans protect them. Danny carried me on his back for 6 miles through a swamp because my legs gave out. He stood between me and a Vraxian who could have torn him apart. He stayed awake all night to make sure nothing in the dark reached us. He is the most dangerous being I have ever met, and that is exactly why I want to stay next to him. Because a human does not use their strength to hurt the small. A human uses it to keep the small alive. The administrator stared at Rillick for a moment, and then quietly updated his file without further comment. Mila processed the experience differently. She was a scientist by nature, and she dealt with what had happened by writing about it. Her paper for Professor Galeth's Xenosociology class was titled The Deathworld Paradox, and it became the most discussed student paper in the Academy's recent history. In it, Mila argued that humans were the most dangerous species in the known galaxy, but not for the reasons most people assumed. Yes, their physical abilities were remarkable. The endurance, the adaptability, the pain tolerance, the immune system that could fight off infections that would kill most galactic species in hours. But these traits were not unique. Other Deathworld species had strength, others had speed, others had venom or armor or claws. What made humans different, Mila wrote, was their psychology. Humans formed bonds with anything. They adopted predators as companions and prey animals as pets. They named their vehicles and talked to their plants. They crossed galaxies not to conquer, but to say hello. They walked into rooms full of aliens that their biology should have told them to fear or dominate. And instead, they pulled up a chair and offered to share their lunch. And when something threatened the beings they had bonded with, humans did not run, and they did not negotiate. They stepped forward with a heartbeat that slowed instead of racing, and they made it very clear, without raising their voice, that the threat would have to go through them first. The most terrifying thing about a human, Mila concluded, was not that they could kill you. It was that they would die for you. And they would die for someone they had known for 3 weeks, for someone half their size, for someone from a species they had never even heard of before the semester started. And they would do it calmly, quietly, and without any expectation of gratitude, because in their minds, that was simply what you did. Professor Galeth read the paper 3 times. The ancient Mairesi's bioluminescent body shifted through colors that none of the younger faculty had ever seen before, and which meant Galeth was experiencing an emotion that did not have a name in the common language. The paper was shared with the full faculty board and then added to the required reading list for every incoming class at the academy. The semester ended on a warm, quiet day. Warm by station standards, which meant the environmental systems had been set 2 degrees above normal for a graduation celebration. But Danny stood in the crowd of students in his plain clothes while other species wore ceremonial robes, armor, or bioluminescent displays. He clapped for his classmates when they received their marks. He shook hands with professors who still found the gesture slightly alarming. And when it was over, he packed his single bag, slung it over his shoulder, and went to say goodbye. He found Torvan on the observation deck where they had sat together so many times during the semester. The Keshari was standing at the railing, looking out at the stars, his sharp yellow eyes reflecting the distant light of 1,000 suns. Danny stood beside him. "Heading home?" he asked. "Yes. My people expect me to take my place among the hunters. It is tradition." "You'll be great at it." Torvan turned to face him. Then, slowly and deliberately, the Keshari extended his right hand, his killing hand, the one with the retractable claws, and held it out, palm open. My Danny looked at the hand and smiled. He took it and shook it firmly. "I learned this from you," Torvan said. "When my elders ask me why I grip the paw of another hunter upon meeting them, I will tell them it is a gesture I learned from the most dangerous predator I have ever known. A predator who carried the weak on his back, who stood against monsters without flinching, and who fell asleep on a rock in hostile territory because he trusted a Keshari to watch over him." Danny's grip tightened for just a moment. "I did trust you," he said. "I still do. They will ask me what species this predator belongs to. And what will you tell them? Torvan bared his teeth. It was not a Keshari expression. It was a human one, a smile. He had been practicing. "Human," he said. "I will tell them the word is human." They stood together for a while longer, watching the stars, and then they parted. Torvan returned to Keshar, where he became one of the greatest hunters his people had ever known, and where he taught the handshake to every young hunter he trained. Danny returned to Earth, to Montana, to the smell of pine and the sound of wind across open land. He stayed for 1 season. Then he applied to the Galactic Union's First Contact Division, and he spent the rest of his career being the first human that new species met when they joined the Union. He was chosen for this role not because he was the strongest or the smartest or the most decorated. He was chosen because he had a gift that no training program could teach and no simulation could replicate. He made the afraid feel safe. He made the hostile feel respected. He made the alien feel welcome. And he reminded every species he encountered that the most terrifying thing in the galaxy was also, somehow, the kindest. His Academy file remained on record at the Sara 9 for centuries. At the bottom of the file, written in glowing bioluminescent ink that never faded, was a note added by Professor Galeth on the day Danny graduated. It read, "Of all the predators I have taught in 4 centuries of service, only one has ever made me grateful that his species chooses to be gentle. Watch the humans. Not because they are dangerous, though they are, beyond what most of you can imagine. Watch them because they choose every single day not to be. And that choice, the choice to protect instead of dominate, to befriend instead of conquer, to carry the weak instead of leave them behind, is the most extraordinary thing in the universe." The ink glowed softly in the dark archive room, pulsing like a heartbeat, steady, calm, unrelenting, just like them.